Okay, so now I pass it on to Fiona to welcome everybody. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Sylvia, and good evening, everyone. My name is Professor Fiona Devine, and I am head of Alliance Manchester Business School. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to everybody tonight to what is our fourth virtual Vital Topics lecture, and the first, of course, of 2021, and really thrilled this evening that we have got such a large audience tonight. So let me take this opportunity to thank our series sponsors, DWF and Capita Consulting. We're very grateful for your support and your ongoing support for this very important series to us. So it gives me great pleasure this evening to welcome to the speaker, Ismail Amla, who is Chief Growth Officer at Capita, where he's responsible for supporting Capita's transformation and organic growth plans and driving change in the sales model. He is also responsible for Capita's consulting business. Ismail is recognized as one of the top 100 most influential Black, Asian, and minority ethnic leaders in the UK tech sector. He has had a technology-focused career spanning Europe and North America, having held leadership roles at Accenture, Capco, and IBM. Ismail, to our pride, graduated from Alliance Manchester Business School with his MBA in 2000 and holds an honorary doctorate from the University of Bolton. He also holds a number of board positions, including at UK Sport and the University of East London, and is also an advisor at the Wiseman Centre for International Business in New York. Drawing on his years of experience, during today's lecture, Ismail is going to explore how organizations can tap into a wealth of resources that will allow them to transform themselves through innovation and technology. And we cannot think, I think, for all of us in different positions of such a significant issue that we're all facing in the world of business and management and far beyond. So he's going to be sharing some key insights and case studies from his really interesting book, From Incremental to Exponential, which we've all been looking at in the senior leadership team of AMBS of late. So his work has been looking at the changing nature of work and the effects of digitization on innovation, and ties in with many of our interests of colleagues in AMBS, and particularly our Innovation Management and Policy Division. So beginning, for example, this year, I think Sylvia, in fact, is leading a major 2-year project which will look at the impact of digital technologies on the UK labour market. As I say, we'll be looking at the changing nature of work and the effects of digitization on innovation, while also exploring the effects of digital technologies on the dynamics of skills and employment, and how these are also changing innovation performance. So, as given her expertise, we're very pleased that Professor Silvia Massini is going to be facilitating today's discussion. Sylvia, as I say, is leading on this project and is a Professor of Economic and Management of Innovation, and is also head of our Innovation Management and Policy Division within the Business School. So in advance, can I thank Ismail and Sylvia for taking the time to share your thoughts and expertise today. I'm sure after Ismail's talk, we're going to have a very interesting conversation, and there's going to be an opportunity for you all in the audience to be asking your questions. And do please come forward with those in the chat function as we're going along. You don't have to wait till the end. We're very pleased to see questions come along. So as the conversation develops. So I very much hope that you enjoyed today's event. And now could I pass over to Ismail? Thank you, Ismail.
Fantastic. Thank you, Fiona. Appreciate the welcome from all of you. And it is so nice to be back in Manchester, albeit remotely, and a real honor to be asked to have a discussion here on the subject of disruption. So I want to talk for about 30 minutes or so, and then hopefully we can open it up into a little bit of a discussion. And I want to talk about disruption, innovation, and what we have learned about organizations that do it well. And want to bring it to life with some real examples. And I think if we thought that this idea about dealing with disruption and encouraging innovation was a choice, I think what we've learned during this pandemic, during these last 12 months, that in this unprecedented time, it's not a choice. And actually, it hasn't been a choice for some time. The idea that organizations have to work at innovation and deal with disruption is part and parcel of business today. And that's sort of what I want to talk about. Now, I know we overuse the word unprecedented, but I'm sure we all agree that what we are experiencing right now is unprecedented. We are going through massive disruptive change, and really a fascinating and critical period for innovation. And I think we will look back at this period as a golden age of innovation, actually, as we look back at it with all the difficulties of the pandemic that we've gone through. Now, why will we look at it like that? So if you think about industries, they're having to deal with extraordinary levels of economic, social, technological disruption, all sorts of change, shifts happening that we're having to deal with. And it all seems really crazy. The bad news is that it's here to stay. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the pace of change we're going through right now is the slowest pace of change we will experience for the rest of our career and our lives. What am I talking about when I talk about the pace of change? Well, there's three things I think would categorize what we're going through right now in terms of change. One is that there is new things affecting us every day. Let's think of it as new technologies coming into our lives every day. So it's perpetual. Every day something is happening. The second bit of change is that it's pervasive. It's happening everywhere. And great example during COVID times in that the change in education, in how we deal with our health, how we deal with financial services, how we deal with government, what's happening with insurance, it's everywhere. It's not one area. And the third thing is that the change is exponential. Now, what does exponential mean? The great thing about COVID is that everybody starts talking about exponential, right? And exponential means that something happens really quickly, really fast. But we all know what exponential means, right? So let me just make sure we all know what exponential means, because this is the core of what I'm going to talk about, because exponential change means we need to deal with it very differently. So if you think about it, imagine you're offered a deal with your bank where your money doubles every 3 days. Your money doubling every 3 days is an exponential point. If you invest $1 today, how long will it take for you to be a millionaire? Is it a year, 6 months, 100 days? The exponential change of that, whatever doubling every 3 days, means you will be a millionaire in 60 days. You'll have $1,048,576. That is the rate of change that we're having to deal with everything. And I'll come on to that in a little while, which is why the way we need to manage it has got to change. So bringing all of that together, it's perpetual, it's pervasive, it's exponential, really means that we have the ingredient for a golden age of innovation. So what does that mean for organizations, for businesses? What does it mean for us as leaders? And this is what the book was about. Myself and Vivek Wadhwa. Vivek is an academic from Carnegie Mellon and Harvard in the USA. I've spent all of my time in business, and we came at it from different areas to say, what does it mean for organizations, especially large enterprise organizations and government, which really finds it difficult to do business, to deal with disruption and innovation? And that's what I'm going to share with you in terms of some of what we learned. Now, if you think about it, even before COVID, we were actually seeing massive disruption in business, right? In the UK, three quarters of all companies disappeared from the FTSE 100 over the last 30 years. For those of you who are doing your MBAs or studying this space, this will not be news to you. In the USA, the average term for a business, which is in the S&P 500, i.e. the top performing 500 companies in the USA, has shifted from an average of 67 years to 15 years. So the time you're at the top has got smaller as well. So in business terms, we're dealing with this period called VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Of course, a concept from the US Army when they were describing what they were dealing with the Cold War. And disruptions are happening more quickly, more often. The speed at which organizations need to adapt for things happening to them for their survival has to be instantaneous, or you end up what we called in the book in the Hall of Toast, which are organizations, and when we know about them, all these organizations who have failed. Now, I think the pandemic has poured fuel onto the fire and accelerated many of the trends. And you might think that this is all badness, but actually, the change also means that success can be exponential. It's an incredible story if you think about Amazon. 22 years to become the second tech company actually to post a $100 billion quarter in terms of sales. Sort of nearly half the time it took Apple, less than half the time it took Exxon. And the two tech giants, Amazon and Apple, are the only two companies alongside Walmart and ExxonMobil actually to hit $100 billion in quarterly sales. So the exponential nature of everything going on, organizations who react to it are also getting exponential success in what they're saying. But also a lot of failure, a lot of success. Why is that happening? We talked about the exponential change. So there's a lot of change happening at once. If you look at this, as you can see from this slide, you can see the inventions in the last 200 years. Why is that happening? Why is so much happening in the last 200 years? Falling cost of production, minimization of components, technologies, convergence of technologies coming together make these types of innovations possible. If you think about how quickly we are adopting to these new inventions, which also disrupts business, you can see, and this is a little bit difficult to read, but if I can just point out a couple of things. The landline, if you think about the landline as a telephone, got to 90% of the USA population in about 80 years. The tablet got to 60% of the USA population in less than 10 years. Why is that happening? So we've got increased connectivity, we've got instant communication, we've got established infrastructure that people can use to get the technologies out. We've got people partnering together like they never used to, the ecosystem, we'll come back to that. And we can now spread ideas and products like never before. And so what happens when you put together exponential introduction of inventions and immediate adoption? And this is, I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. This is how long does it take for somebody to get 100 million users story. Telephone, 75 years, internet, 13 years, WhatsApp, 7 years, Candy Crush, 15 months. So we are getting lots of things thrown at us in our lives and our business, creates opportunities and risks. It's happening really quickly, and we're getting really used to adopting them at a really short period of time. If you look at this, and why is this important? What we're seeing here, because this is actually a signpost, a leading indicator to the next massive change, which is the idea that the amount of digital activity is exploding. So this is the output of 4.5 billion internet users. And now don't forget, we're talking about 2 to 4 billion internet users coming online in the next 5 years. So you can only imagine what's going to happen here. And what we've got to remember is that we are still very early in development when it comes to the internet. But in its short period, its rise to prominence and the broad digitization of the world has left us with a really eventful timeline, even if you look at what's going on right now. And if you think about 5G, if you think about other, what that will mean in terms of use cases that people will use the internet for, I suspect by the time you look at this in 2021, 2022, not only will you see exploding numbers, but brand new players, AR, VR, all sorts of things coming into play. Why am I putting this up? It just points to more disruption. And of course, no industry sector is immune, as I'm sure the university is experiencing. I mean, as a result of the pandemic, many educational institutions are now rethinking how they deliver content to students right across the spectrum, from primary to higher to professional learning. And according to some data that we've got from UNESCO, the peak in school closures was registered at the beginning of April last year, when around 1.6 billion learners were affected across 194 countries, accounting for more than 90% of total enrolled learners. The industry was totally disrupted, and now everybody is thinking about what that means. The chart on the left shows the situation at the beginning of this month. Still significant disruption to schools, but equally a period where we might see a significant pivot to how education is delivered. And dare I say it, in this sort of context, a move away from a system that's thousands of years old and involves rows of students sitting in a room facing a teacher at the front of the class. Maybe that is something that is not going to reappear in that context. But if you look at the expected growth in the online education market, we can imagine there's going to be masses of changes to come. In the professional learning space, it's a space that Capita are in. We've seen an even more advanced shift online. Since March 2020, over 21 million learners have joined Coursera, a 353 increase from the same period last year. So disruption in a particular industry in education, but actually education is just one example of the pervasive nature of the disruptive nature of change coming our way. I mean, if you think about all the different things going on, and I'll just pick on 3 or 4, and I'm trying to get the audience to think about what does it mean for not only how you live, but how you work, and what it will mean for your employers or potential employers. You know, if you think about how we work, how we travel to work, the redefinition of supply chains, continued advancements in the use of AI and data, is only going to get faster and more disruptive. A few examples. How will work from home disrupt businesses? Well, of course, it's already disrupting businesses, and massively at that. One of the key aspects is this idea around mental and emotional health will come to the fore. It's something that we've talked about on the periphery, not at the core of the employee proposition. And increasingly, mindful people will look for products and services that seamlessly boost their mental health. We've seen from Microsoft Teams, they've announced new features that help with some of this stuff, but we'll see more of that as we think about working in a hybrid office remote environment. What about the people? What about the world of work? And Fiona talked about the world of work being a key theme that you're going to pick up on. You know, people live longer, there's the need for new skills, they're remote, there is competition of 2 billion people coming online all over the world. All of that will change everything. And the care for the employee, where the employee is after great gigs and not necessarily careers, will be very different from the employer. So for example, Airbnb, due to COVID, Airbnb had to lay off around 25% of the staff, and they then had to launch, or they elected to launch, an alumni talent directory, and an in-house recruiting department basically became the alumni placement team. So they felt it's something that they had to do in terms of looking after the relationship for a lifetime, rather than just as employees. When you think about reimagining cities and towns, we actually don't need to reimagine anything. We're now living in towns and cities that look like we've never imagined. We're steadily moving towards people-first, car-free urban environments that prioritize well-being and different sorts of lifestyles. We've got micro-mobility, urban farming, people are working on strengthening local communities, lots of innovations coming around cities and towns. And then you think about virtual experiences. Is there going to be a virtual Glastonbury? There's already lots of virtual experiences we've seen during 2020. But we will start to see even those things that you could only experience by being there, being challenged by the VR and AR technology, so that there is an acceleration in virtual experiences, both for consumers and professionals. Now, you might think, actually, all right, this is all innovation. I'm sure it'll come. actually, what I would say is that during this pandemic, we have seen some intense innovation, some brilliant examples. If you think about the NHS, we all know the NHS, we all love the NHS, for those of you in the UK at least, which is the National Health Service. The National Health Service in the UK in December 2019 were reporting 15% of 23 million primary care appointments taking place by phone or online. 15%. 49% in April 2020, 90% in May 2020. Now, don't forget, the reason they were 15% was because of 100 reasons, right? All the resistors for change. It can't happen. We're not sure whether we can get the quality. We're not sure whether we've got technology. We don't know whether we've got the money. All these things were addressed because disruption took place. And suddenly there's a new way of how we engage with the NHS. Will we go back to the way that we used to engage? Lots of other examples as well. There's a great platform called Security and Safety Things. It's a startup platform for surveillance cameras, owned by Bosch, 100% owned by Bosch in Munich. As soon as COVID emerged, it suddenly became an application for face mask adherence, social distancing measurements, automatically alerting users about the number of people around you and whether there was any unsafe clustering. So what we're beginning to see is innovation around existing technologies that could be adjusted for an opportunity around. And we're going to see more and more of that. We also, I don't know whether you saw it on the news, the Boston Dynamics robot dog, which was walking around the Singapore parks and telling people to keep socially distant. I'm sure if I saw one of them walking towards me, it would send me running, that's for sure. And then we had also, I talked about the virtual events. We had a virtual reality company, Zoan, who actually created a virtual concert to celebrate May Day in Helsinki and attracted 12% of Finland's population for first time ever to get that population together. So we're beginning to see a lot of innovation already. And what we should recognize is that during economic crises, we have seen new businesses come together. So Airbnb and Uber were created during 2008, 2009 financial crises. Microsoft and Dell, oil crises of the 70s. You've got Alibaba created out of SARS in 2004. We've seen lots of that happening, and we will continue to see a lot of that. Now, as we start to think about the post-pandemic future, just a couple of thoughts on trends that have been around for a while, but I think will become more relevant over the next decade. And they have massive implications for society, for individuals, for business. The first of it is longevity. And this one, I would say, for people who are interested in this, is a great book by Professor Linda Gratton, The 100-Year Life, where she and Andrew Scott talk about this in some detail. Of course, it's not a new trend, but it is a recognition that in developed societies, we're getting older. Europe is on track to become the oldest continent in the world, massive implications for economies and societies. And in the developed world, people, of course, are having fewer children. And these have massive implications, savings, pensions, how do we rescale workforces and so on. Meanwhile, in the developing economies, 60% of Africa's 1.25 billion people are under the age of 25, for instance. And what you've got is a new wave of energetic entrepreneurs emerging from this continent with fresh, unconstrained thinking, with access to the platform, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, the internet from day one without any of the baggage that we all had to go through in the developed world as we implemented some of those access to some of those opportunities. The second trend that I think we need to keep in mind is climate change. Again, not a new trend, but what is different in the last couple of years is that we now have institutional investors, the big money, moving to shape this as a global issue. You may have heard Larry Fink last month issued a start warning to CEOs in his annual letter. And I read here, it says, no issues rank higher than climate change. And that the current coronavirus pandemic serves as a stark reminder of the need to drastically combat climate-related risks. And I think what we're going to see, the reason I put this up, is this is going to be another disruptive factor, because I think what we're going to see this decade is an acceleration of innovation across the environmental, social, and governance agendas as organizations tackle this boardroom debate. So, given this backdrop of what I see as exponential change in the environment in which we're living, working, and doing business, I want to talk a little bit about what does it take for organizations to respond to this and create opportunity around this disruption and the opportunity for innovation. Fascinated in this area, and as I say, I co-authored this with Vivek over in the US in this book called Incremental to Exponential. And the real question, and the success factors I'll talk about, Just Cause, Ready to Invent, Platform and Data, Experience and Culture. But the real question we were trying to answer was, why aren't all large organizations behaving and innovating like startups? So if we take an example, right, the space industry. April 2019, the Falcon Heavy rocket took off from its base in Florida. It was the first in a new generation of space exploration. So this is a rocket that could not only pilot its way through space, but be able to navigate and return to Earth, radically reducing the cost and time normally absorbed by space travel. The company behind Falcon X wasn't one of the legacy giants of space flight. It wasn't NASA, it wasn't Boeing, it wasn't British Aerospace. It was none of those. It was, of course, SpaceX, the latest brainchild of Elon Musk. In fact, in more recent news, many of you will be aware, 4 astronauts left Earth on a couple of weeks ago and arrived at the International Space Station in their SpaceX Dragon capsule. SpaceX just launched one of its Falcon 9 rockets for a record 7th time. Talk about reuse. And the booster carried a full stack of 60 Starlink internet satellites into orbit. And by the way, that itself has a story. The 60 internet satellites are, of course, going to give access to these 2 to 4 billion people who are going to come online on the internet and become part of the global ecosystem. And not only did the booster do that, but then it nailed a landing at sea. And the key question at the heart of all of this is not how did SpaceX achieve this? The question is, why didn't the incumbents? How has innovation and creativity become so stifled in large established organization that it takes a new kid on the block to quite literally go where no one has gone before? And as we did our research and we talked to lots of organizations, big and small, across the world, it seems that the belief of many large organizations across private and public sector is that disruption is something that happens to them, that it's bad, that it's something they have to respond to and even defend against. And in reality, what we found is that these large organizations, private and public, are the organizations that have huge advantages in scale and knowledge. They have marketing machines, they have clients, they have brand, they have customer data, they have exposure, they have technology, they have partnerships, and they can and should be using these very advantages rather than be driven by it. And actually, if you think about some of the theory around this, around innovation and disruption, and you look at Christian Clayson, of course, who was the godfather, if you like, around a lot of this work. One of his central arguments was that market leaders are often set up to fail as technologies and industries change or are disrupted. And they're the ones who spot and develop new technologies. The problem is they fail to value new disruptive innovations. So if it's different, they're looking at how can it fit into what I do today? And that has always been a problem and still a problem in many large organizations today. And what we found is that good innovations really, the reason the innovation perspective has changed is that there's a more complex landscape. Competition no longer comes from your industry alone. So if you look at SpaceX, competition came from a guy who makes cars. Business model innovation beats product innovation, and platforms beat business models. And I'll talk about that a little bit. But if you think about how a lot of what the new organizations are going to market with different business models, the platform ecosystem, then that is something that creates a much more complex operating environment. Companies that adopt soon gain an exponential advantage. That was never the case when this was originally developed back in the time by Christian Clayson. And command and control no longer works as an organization, as an organizational construct. So there's been lots of change, which, you know, Vivek and I thought actually challenged some of the work done in the innovator's dilemma. And as we start thinking about what is it that allows you to disrupt and innovate, there were some new rules that came to the fore. If we actually think around incumbents, if you think of the response to the pandemic from research and pharma, I mean, that's an incredible story, right? Processes that took up to 10 years to create a vaccine have been fast-tracked to less than 10 months. We now have 5 vaccines available to fight the virus. And this could only have been done with the mindset and dedication of pioneering thinkers and doers rather than incumbents defending the norm. So what did we find? I mean, when we did all of this research and we talked to a lot of people, we did a lot of empirical research as well. What did we find organizations had or did in driving innovation and change? And it really boils down to five or six things. So a just cause, and I'll go into some examples in all of these. A just cause or a purpose, a mindset, or being ready to invent, technology, data and platforms, experience being at the core of what you do, an experience of the customer, the citizen is what I'm talking about here, and your internal culture. And I'll give some examples of all of these. If you think about a just cause, what do I mean by a just cause? So a just cause or a purpose is a common thing that we found amongst businesses that could drive change internally, because the employees were signed up to a mission aligned with this purpose and just cause rather than work. And let me give you a few examples. So if you think about Patagonia, and I'm sure some of you have got some kit around Patagonia, very cool hiking gear and so on. They wanted to create a brand new business, and the business they wanted to create was secondhand goods. And the way they went about that was on Black Friday, which is essentially the same, it's the biggest sales day of the year for the USA, Black Friday. It's the same as the Boxing Day, if you like, in the UK. Black Friday 2011, they actually put an ad out in the USA which said, "Do not buy this jacket." It was their own jacket. And the ad read, "Because Patagonia wants to be in business for a good long time, leave a world inhabitable for our kids, purpose, we want to do the opposite of what every other business to do today. We ask you to buy less, to reflect before you spend a dime on this jacket, or in fact, anything else." That actually unlocked innovation and a profit engine for Patagonia, but disrupted the industry and created a whole new industry around second-hand, high-end goods. And it's still actually a business that's available today, a big profit line for Patagonia. Another example of using purpose or just cause to drive change was actually between IBM and Apple almost 40 years ago now. And for those of you who are studying in the business school, it's worth looking this up and reading this story. And what happened here is, if you remember, Apple were using them. Their mission was to make the power of computing available to everyone. And if you remember, IBM were in the mainframe game until they decided they were not in the mainframe game. When they entered the market, what Apple did was put a full-page advert out in the Wall Street Journal. And what they basically said is, "Welcome to our mission, personal computers. This is a benefit it will have. We will look forward to responsible competition, and we appreciate your commitment to our purpose. Welcome to the task," which is in the idea of putting personal computing in the hands of everybody. So great way of energizing your internal workforce to drive the change around purpose. One final one that I'll pick on here is with the Behavioral Insight team, which is a team that was set up by David Cameron in the UK government, who was using purpose to drive people's behavior as they were returning their taxes. And one of their most famous projects, and the behavioral team was psychologists, seasoned government staff, they came up with a very minor change to a tax letter that sent out by the UK government that subtly introduced peer pressure. So by simply altering the letters to say that most people in their local area have already paid their taxes, the behavioral insight team was able to boost repayment rates by north of 5%. And again, around purpose, peer pressure, this was it resulted in a very different behavior from people in driving this sort of change. And especially driving change from your citizen is one of the hardest things to do. So first thing that we found was businesses who drove change, dealt with innovation and disruption, had a purpose and a just cause that they really put at the core of everything that they did. The second thing was around mindset. And, you probably read about the growth mindset work. And this is around how comfortable are you in creating a new service when the old service works? How comfortable are you as a business, as an organization, as an individual, as a leader in doing something that nobody's asked for? So a couple of examples here. If you think about New York City, Bloomberg, when Bloomberg was the mayor there, he and his team conceived this idea of a 511 system, which is basically a city concierge, which is a service that didn't exist before, nobody had asked for, but now it's become the core of everything, of the core of how the city runs in New York City. And this was a culture of data-driven management and systems to monitor New York City in a way that was previously unimaginable. And all services for the citizen is available through the city. So the mindset, so organizations that deal with this have a mindset which says, we're not just going to do what people have asked us to do, we're going to think of what the art of the possible is. And actually the behavioral unit that I talked about, the insights team, was another one. Actually, nobody had asked for this to be set up, but actually it was set up in the UK Cabinet Office, and it became a social purpose limited company in 2014. And the sort of work it does now spans 7 offices. I think they have 750 projects, loads and loads of trials across the world. But again, the purpose of that team is to think of areas of opportunity rather than think about disruption that is happening to them. So 2 examples. I won't go on to the third one in the interest of time. The next thing that we found was important for organizations was this recognition that there is such a thing as the platform economy. And platform or ecosystems around platforms are going to be critical if we want to leverage what's going on around technology at the moment. One of the things that you may or may not know is 7 of the 10 most valuable companies globally are now based on a platform business model. That's the creation of digital communities and marketplaces that allow different groups to interact and transact. And of course, we know them. We know Uber and Airbnb, but there's also Salesforce and Facebook and Google and Microsoft. And they have become the most powerful businesses, in the powerful forces in business. And companies that are doing well in innovation and disruption are either building platforms or hooking into platforms so other people can get access to their networks. And what is happening here, of course, is the recognition that organizations are not expecting to do everything in their value chain to get to the client. And in fact, they are going to hook into ecosystems and platforms, which will mean that sometimes they will compete with other organizations and other times they may well work with other organizations. And actually, governments are not excluded. And we're beginning to see quite a bit of change and movement from governments who want to take access, who want to have access to this platform economy. So if we look at banking, and we've heard about open banking, especially in Europe, which enables third-party developers to breed applications and services around the financial institution and create the next generation of fintechs. Snoop actually is a great example. It's a smart money mobile app that helps consumers save money on bills and subscriptions, but it's based on hooking in to the open banking platform. Science is another example, and I'm sure a lot of you have come across this, which is open access, data sharing, and this is one example which greatly accelerated the COVID research and helped further our understanding of the biology, the transmission and the spread, and in fact the fix around some of this. But also citizens. So in the public sector, we're seeing more and more governments thinking about what role will platforms play in providing a service back to the citizen. A great example is e-residency, is a government-issued digital identity launched by Estonia in 2014. And what that does is it allows entrepreneurs from anywhere around the world, any of us, to set up and run a location-independent business, but does not entail, for example, tax residency or citizenship's rights to live in Estonia. Now, this legal and technical platform actually is the first of its kind, and the digitally accessible user benefits include, you can do company registrations, document signings, online banking. Between the launch and February 2018, Estonia had 33,000 applicants from 154 countries who have built 5,000 companies as e-residents. And it's fascinating, actually. Estonia is amongst the most advanced and forward-looking digital administrations with a radical approach to citizen data, and plans to move to this invisible government, they call it, under which citizens receive services automatically rather than having to apply. So, your passport runs out, you'll get another passport in the post, kind of thing. So it's not yet the global standard for government service, but it starts to highlight where some of these services are going to go. And a great example of organizations, and in this instance, a public sector organizations using platforms and technology to drive disruption and innovation. If we think about from a data perspective, what we found as we looked around was that leading companies not only made decisions faster around data, they made bigger decisions and they made bolder decisions. And they used the data to drive business strategy. So business strategy moved away from let's do a 6-month thing every 3 years to see what your business strategy is, to let's get an instant insight on what we're learning from the data and make big decisions based on that. A couple of things that bring that to life. One was, if you remember this idea of TikTok being put up for sale in the US, and lots of technology organizations were looking at it. And one of the organizations that raised the biggest eyebrows was Walmart, who wanted to acquire TikTok. Walmart, because it gave them access to data and a demographic from a user perspective that they didn't have in the past. Big decision, database decision that would have changed the trajectory of that firm had that gone through. Another example of strategy that I really liked, of strategy really being based on data, is McDonald's. If you think about McDonald's and the idea that they have the all-day breakfast, and I don't know whether this is just a US thing, but they have the all-day breakfast in the US stores. And that came not from any strategy, any data, other than the data from social media and a social listening effort as to what people talked about when they talked about McDonald's. And what they talked about was, wouldn't it be great if I can get breakfast at 4 o'clock? And hence a new service line. And so the organizations, again, who made this, who do this disruption and innovation well, focus on data. Data is a massive thing to do. If I go into the next one, which is this customer and citizen experience. And this is important, especially now, as we're all, for example, we're all right now in a remote environment, experiencing some experience right now of this particular event. And the reality is that the last great experience we have online is the minimum expectation of the next experience we want to have. So it doesn't matter whether we go in from a government website to Amazon, to Google, to the local vendor your partner that you might have. Your expectation is a particular one based on the last great experience that you have. And what we found is that organizations who are dealing with disruption and innovation have shifted from the product and service mindset to an experience mindset. And this is part of them being customer or citizen obsessed. And the reason is that experiences are really hard to copy, and it can drive disproportionate loyalty and a really great, strong customer connection. If you think of the Disney theme park or a Nike store, these are experience destinations. Or you think of the ease with which you use Netflix or Uber, these are carefully designed customer experiences. And whatever business you're in, public or private, you are competing. We are all competing with the Apples and the Google. We just need to get on with it. And in some countries, they are taking this very seriously. And if you think about Denmark, for example, they're already a leader in digital government. In fact, it was voted the world's best e-government by the UN earlier this year. They've devoted a whole task force to thinking about what the citizen experience might look like. The final thing, maybe one of the last couple of things that I would talk about is culture. So where we think organizations have done this well, culture becomes really important, and culture drives things. So if you think about 2004 in Amazon, an engineer named Charlie Ward dropped an idea into a company-wide employee suggestion box. That idea is today a $10 billion business called Amazon Prime. He said, basically, let's have a loss leader. That means that people give a standard fee and we will deliver everything for free. The reason that succeeded was Charlie felt that whatever his idea was going to be read. And the second thing that happened was Jeff Bezos, the CEO, personally was involved in the process and sponsored the process. So a couple of things going on there in terms of what it means for culture. So this is not just a box that you put an idea in, but you know something's going to happen about that. Another example of that, if you think about the Post-it note, which was created by the company 3M, that idea came from this chemist called Sylvia Spencer. Now that's good, but actually the real magic around 3M is that they have a 15% program that actively encourages employees to spend 15% of their time pursuing new ideas. The result of that, 3M today has about 23,000 patents. So culture is really important. Creating the right teams and environment is really important if you're serious about innovation. Amazon have come to a view that the team has to be an optimal size to create the right environment and to support innovation. And they have something called the pizza model. And that's a rule that no team should be larger than a dozen, 12 people, or more people than can share a couple of pizzas. That's the Amazon model. If you think about Google have these objectives and key results where they are encouraged to shoot for the stars, which means that they set goals and they can achieve their full bonus even if they meet 70% of the goals. Culture is really different from what a lot of large organizations are doing today. And you know, being exponential isn't just about taking advantage of technology or having a just cause or having a culture. It also comes into how you organize for innovation. And this is the last thing that I would talk about that we picked up from our research for the book, which is that innovation isn't a sideline activity. It can't be confined to a program. The large organizations who do this well don't have an innovation team who then tell them what the innovation might look like. It is part and parcel of how they do business. If you've done any reading around Steve Jobs, he actually built Pixar Studios and the new Apple campus to ensure that the teams that would never normally meet were constantly crossing paths, hoping that these random encounters might spark new ideas. Now, of course, it doesn't guarantee innovation, the fact that you're going to make sure that people bump into each other, but it's a helping hand along the way to opening up traditional hierarchies and structure to a new place where new thoughts and concepts might be conceived and shared. So with that, I'll come to the end of the prepared remarks, if you like. Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk here about some of the stuff that we found over 25, 30 years of working and a lot of academic research from Vivek. And I hope it started to help answer the question.
Thank you, Ismail. That was a very, very interesting presentation. Lots of food for thoughts here. We have a few questions in the chat function already. I would like to just start with something, picking up something of the many notes that I had. And it's about the resistance to change, because that is what I see one of the biggest problems for large companies that need to react to the emergence of new competitors. And it touches upon some of the things that you said earlier in terms of culture, which is a big problem to change, and how to make these random encounters happen. Yeah. Now in a virtual environment, if we stop going to the office and share ideas when we meet, how this new reality will lead to innovation and creativity and interaction. Yeah. So maybe it's more than one thought.
Yeah, no, and let me start with your last point of the question, which is around how do you create an environment when we're all working from home, right? I mean, that's a tough one. I think the work that is happening around, when we get post this, I don't think we ever get back to what the world of work looked like. But I think there is already, certainly we're doing it, and I'm talking to other organizations like Microsoft and IBM, they're also doing it, which is we're going to have to create a hybrid environment where people come together to work, to think, to bump into each other, but we're going to have to design it in rather than just assume that everybody goes to work and that happens. And it's going to have to be part of how we are going to get that element of the culture addressed. The other thing that you talked about around resistance to change, there's some great examples actually. If you think about Microsoft, probably the most successful company right now, and the resistance to, and something happened when Satya Nadella was appointed CEO, because the organization is the same, the technology was the same, the strategy is pretty much the same. And what happened was Satya opened, he in his book, Hit Refresh, he talks a lot about the sort of emotional quotient and the EQ that he wanted applied in his organization. But really what he did was he made decisions quickly. So the first thing is the decision was from him. So there was leadership commitment. Then the decision was quickly. So in his first press conference, he talked about the fact that Microsoft software was going to be available on all Apple products immediately. And that was something Microsoft was pushing, really pushing. Third thing that he did was he started talking about how they were no longer, so the big strategic decisions, 6 weeks into his tenure, that Microsoft Office is actually not what they're about. They were going to be about cloud, and they were going to be around connectivity, and Teams, of course, comes into that. So, and the next thing we saw was not any 3 to 5 year view of the vision, but a view of the vision based on data that he picked up from his clients. It's customer obsession based on data. And so I think, what we found, and I think Satya is a great example of that, was this like 5 or 6 things that organizations are doing to address this resistance to change, because the resistance to change is really human and really is always going to be there. The question is how quickly, how effectively you can deal with it.
Thank you very much. So I will start from the questions that I see in the chat, starting from the beginning. I would like people to ask their own questions. So Alessandro Ortolani, would you ask your question? Yeah, thank you.
Ciao Silvia, thank you very much for that. Ismail, great presentation. Thank you very much for sharing with us. Couple of questions around and building on the points that Silvia just mentioned. The first is why larger organizations are not properly balancing between exploitation of what they are currently doing versus exploration. What about the main barriers in order to better balance those two modes of behaving? And the second is more around where do we need to look in order to create more innovative organization in larger firm, at the individual level or more at the system level? Thank you in advance, Ismail.
Yeah, great questions. I think as we look at all of the organizations and we looked at a lot of failures and a lot of successes, the core of organizations that couldn't balance the exploitation of what we have versus the exploring of what we need to do is an overriding too much focus on the financial shareholders rather than the focus on all your stakeholders, your community, your people, your employees, your partners, and what you think the future might look like. So where we saw boards and CEOs focus on the quarterly results, there was almost a direct correlation. It wasn't the only thing, but there was almost a direct correlation on the behavior that drove. There was a lot of other things, and some of them, I started talking about and alludes to your second question, which is where does the innovation come from? I think the first, and I was in the middle of IBM actually, as IBM was going through this change, very painful change from being an implementer of large systems to data AI cloud. And the first thing is recognition and a burning platform that this is something that we want to do, which means it needs resources directed at that rather than directed at this. There needs to be an environment which says and this is new, so organizations are learning this. There needs to be an environment which says you don't have the right skills, but we will get you to the right skills. There's nobody, we don't have enough data scientists in the world. We don't have enough cloud experience in the world or AI experts in the world. We will get you to the right skills. And so an environment which isn't fear-based, but which is learning-based. And the best organizations did that. And then, everybody talks about this from a culture perspective in that if you want to innovate, you need to give people the opportunity to come up with ideas. You need to have a process to capture those ideas. You need to have investment to put into those ideas. And you need to give people the preparation, the idea that they might fail in those ideas. And that is in a lot of large organizations, which are heavy with process and governance and multiple levels, that the biggest, the blockers are those things that we need to get around. And so there's no simple or single answer, Alessandro, but those are some of the themes that we found as we talked about some of the things you talked about.
Thank you. I see Alan has a comment and a second comment as well. I don't know if Alan Y has a question or if he wants to ask anything. Yes, Alan.
Yes, I just want to compliment Ismail. I think basically the key thing is the motivation, the purpose, and the service that we provide, and that can create a new business model.
Yeah, I agree, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is from Lee Mabi.
Maybe. Thank you. With their levels of R&D and a thirst for innovation and their market size, how likely is it that one of the GAFA firms could fail?
What's GAFA?
Google, Amazon, Facebook.
I don't think that is the reason they will fail. I think that if you think about the purpose and the questions around purpose of these organizations, that is their biggest risk right now. If you think, as we actually talk to a lot of organizations, people are questioning why Facebook are using my data in the way that they're using the data. And this goes back to, therefore, Facebook react in a particular way, which we all see because it's in the public domain, and that drives all sorts of behaviors in the employee workforce that we might be used to seeing in some unionized workforce. It's incredible, actually, what we're seeing. And so I think, I'm not sure they would fail in the sense of fall off, but I think the biggest risk to these businesses is their purpose and rebuilding the trust that they had with their consumers whose data they totally depend on for their success. And very interesting, the spat between Facebook and Apple right now, right, is around sharing of data because they have different purposes and what they think they can do with the data.
Oh, that's
my view, Lee.
very
I'm sure you might have another view.
Yeah, the issue about the data, who owns the data, and the GDPR issues, that is only going to grow further in the future. Okay, so Ahmed Soliman, he's got 2 questions. If I don't see, Ahmed, yes.
Yeah. Hi, Ismail. Thank you so much for your presentation. First question is how to learn innovation. So if you want to be a surgeon, you go to the medical school, you spend years in practicing that, and then you be a surgeon. How actually you can learn innovation? I think that's a very important question. Second thing is a lot of innovation is happening around technology. And when we talk about technology, then also we need somebody with diverse background in technology to lead innovation in companies. How we can get them into actually companies across different sectors where they might not have the vertical or the sector expertise. And I think companies also reluctant to bring in somebody from outside of that business or industry to lead innovation. But based on what you were showing today, it's all about this new kid in the block, or somebody coming to disrupt this incumbent kind of companies and sectors. Thank you.
Yeah, the great question again. Thank you for that. The first part of the question is of course a tough one, which is how do you learn innovation? I would say there's a couple of things. One is innovation is trying to do something in a way that isn't being done today. It doesn't have to be new, but it's just different from what is being done today. That takes courage and an environment. So you're not learning anything in a way. There's a little bit of you being open to be able to do it and somebody listening to you. But I think the biggest thing I would say, and I think Alvin Toffler quote, which is the ability to unlearn and relearn is probably the big thing stopping us thinking of innovative ideas. The idea that the way we do it today can be done differently, better. Just the idea that it could be is the trigger that allows you to relearn, unlearn, and relearn. And how do you practice that? You practice it by trying and failing, by learning new things, by unlearning things that you know, by getting things wrong. You can't, you've got to be comfortable in that environment, right? Or comfortable as an individual that you're going to go to somebody and say, I've got an idea. Suddenly the showcase is on you. And B, you might come back and say, and it failed. That is the core of, I think, what we need to get comfortable with. In terms of, will a large company bring tech people rather than people from the same industry to drive innovation? I think the chances are that industries, as we expect, as we understand them today, are going to be disrupted beyond recognition. So insurance and health come together if you think about it. Retail and financial services come together if you think about it. So what does it mean to be an industry expert? And so I think that's one data point. The other data point is there are not enough technical people to go around. There just isn't. So I think this fear that a lot, and we have it in our firm as well, this fear that a lot of people have, which is you're going to automate my job, and everything I do is going to be done by a robot, and you're going to bring more technical people in to do the data science and the AI and the cloud. Those people don't exist. And so what we are looking to, and we're working with a couple of departments on this, is for large organizations, shouldn't they have a responsibility to reskill the people whose jobs might disappear because of technology and innovation? Doesn't that mean that we might need to start thinking about a national curriculum? And because doesn't that then give competitive advantage to the nation that you're living in? So I think it's a big question, actually. It's not around one organization. It's around how do we meet the needs of the nation for these new skills, and how do all the businesses work together to meet the needs for the nation but look after the people who we can reskill into these new opportunities.
That's very interesting. This is also something that I'm looking at in my research and some publications that I'm working on. So I totally agree with you, and it's a very important point for universities as it's an important mission that we have.
Yeah.
Next question.
The universities have got to play a big part in that space, don't they?
Absolutely. I mean, there are some of the questions that touch upon this, and what are the skills that are needed, and how can companies think about what they need so they can tell us. And the next question is from Annette Bramley.
Hi. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for a really great talk. So my question wasn't very well phrased in the chat, but one of the things that occurs to me is that universities are in their own right kind of big businesses, and also aspire to be very innovative, and would like to be at the forefront of tackling some of the really big problems that we're facing, like climate change. And we've seen how that's happened a bit in COVID. And I just wonder, are there any areas of your kind of framework which you feel are particularly ripe for for picking off, either on the kind of business model side or on the innovation side?
So I think the university's business model is going to be disrupted significantly, if it's not already being disrupted. If you think about the content, if you assume all content is free and available to everybody in the world, what's the competitive advantage, or what's the offering? If you then think about, I can get Yale content, or I can get Manchester Business School content. Where am I going to go? So a couple of things come into play. One is experience. And around experience, if you think about AR, VR, as part of the hybrid offering that universities are putting out, who gets there first with the AR, VR offering? I think that's important. As part of the experience, what sort of ecosystem is my university going to be in that allows me access to skills and people and experiences and all this stuff that I wouldn't get otherwise? I think that becomes an experience. So I think actually, and I'm sure the Manchester University folk are dealing with this, but I do think actually this is an industry ripe for disruption, not only in the business model itself, but also the expectations of what the student might want. And by the way, the student might be a lifetime student, and he or she may be 65 years old, wanting to get into the next phase of their career by doing a 2-year, I now want to go into healthcare. This is part of the longevity point. And so I think, I don't know what you'd say, Silvia, but I think you've got some troubling times ahead.
Yes. There is a question by Mustafa Koriba, but I don't see him in the list anymore. So I think he might have left the meeting, the event. So we can move to the next one by Dimitri. Dimitri is muted. I can ask his question. Do you have any examples of disruptive innovation happening ahead of its time and thus being unsuccessful? And that is a big question about timing of launch, timing of entry. Yes, I'm sure that Ismail can.
Yeah. If you think, actually, the best example is around the .com era of 2000, 1999, 2000, 2001. I remember it because I was asked by my then boss, I was working at Computer Sciences Corporation, to set up the .com part of CSC. And we failed gloriously. We never made any, we lost buckets of money. And he actually said it was the most expensive MBA he'd ever paid for. Because it was just, everything was, the internet was available, but everything that could make it successful wasn't there. So, you know, for example, we were trying to create a platform for haulage organizations, which was great, except all the haulage organizations didn't have the internet, so they couldn't use the platform. So it was ahead of its time. But around that time frame, I think we saw lots of examples of things that were innovative before its time.
Yeah. Li Hongshang, would you like to ask the question? Maybe.
Yes, thank you very much for for the wonderful presentation and eye-opening. And I'm from the MOP group, School of Engineering. MOP means management of projects. So my question is related to project management. So innovation does need projects to get through, particularly when you have intended purpose or purpose-driven innovation. But projects can be very unsuccessful from very sort of a traditional industry like the construction industry to the very innovative industry like R&D industry. So what's your experience and insights of how to use the proper designed project formats or process to deliver intended innovation?
Yeah. So a couple of things I'd say to that. If you are working in a project where innovation and data are going to be important in how that project is executed, then some of the methodologies around the projects that we've seen have changed massively. So, of course, agile and more flexible, more sprint-oriented project management methodologies are more appropriate for that type of environment. The other thing that we see working, and this is also in organizations like Boeing, by the way, big manufacturing organizations, but they're building stuff over such a long period of time that innovation comes and changes everything, including their design. So they need to be aware of real-time inputs and be working in sprints and in an agile way. The other thing that was a key component was multidisciplinary teams. And so, for example, working on a project, I don't know whether you've come across this idea of growth hacking, for example. So this is the idea, just as one example of getting the product built, designed, launched, and rather than take it through the design, marketing, sales, product development, you put all of them together in one team, and they are building, designing, launching at the same time. And of course, that also then creates also complexities on how do you industrialize that, how do you communicate with the rest of your teams and so on. But we're beginning to see actually lots of very different approaches to take into account that the timeframes are smaller, there's more data points coming in, and the likelihood of a project lasting for 6 months with the project milestones, deliverables not changing is actually pretty low, almost in any industry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here there is a comment by my colleague Bruce Teller. He's a professor of innovation management. So he's telling that if people would like to know more about innovation, they could come to our business school to learn more.
I'd love to.
Yes, there is another comment. So the next question is actually from Nikolai.
Yeah, hi, Ismail. Hello, good evening, everyone. I've been working in the manufacturing industry for many years. I'm a chemical engineer, and my question is, how do you stimulate innovation in that area when you have limitations around the CapEx? There are many ideas that could push the organizations forward, but there are limitations on the money available now. That's the first question. And the second question is, we talked about exponential growth. Do you think that that's going to be supported by AI in the future?
Yeah. So I think actually manufacturing industry is, of course, going to be massively disrupted through a lot of innovation, but 3D printing might be one of the big ones that might impact that. And I think the money may well come from private equity, not just your traditional sources that you would expect to come. And in fact, there's a lot of data around the shift of manufacturing from some of the lower cost geographies based on technology to the other geographies in the world. And the business case is all it's very, very rich in terms of some of the business cases that I saw when I was with IBM. You know, in terms of the capex investment in traditional and existing organizations, I don't see that challenge going away, to be honest, unless an organization goes to the markets and say, we're restructuring, we're transforming, go away for 3 years while we change how we do our capex investment, which is happening, by the way, not massively, but is happening here and there. Around AI, I actually think that AI changes the world. I really do. I think every organization is an AI business or they're not in business. And what I mean by that is, if AI is understanding data around everything in your value chain and then using it smartly and using technology to help you make better decisions, then AI is going to not only be something that results in exponential growth, but it's going to be a key dependency on successful businesses.
I totally agree, Ismail. Some thinking that I've been doing recently is also about the importance how to make AI a complement to humans, and rather than a substitution. It relates to what happens with digital technologies and with the machine learning. We cannot think that the machines will think how humans, but because they think differently and they can learn, achieve different outcomes, they can complement humans. So, for example, they are used for medical diagnosis for skin cancer, and the accuracy of the diagnosis of machines is about 90%. Similarly, for dermatologists, they have a 90% accuracy, but they are different 90%. So if you cross that, jointly you get a very, very high accuracy, very close to 100%. So we should also see AI not as a threat, not as a substitution.
Yeah, agreed. Did we lose Silvia?
Hi there, we've just lost Silvia. So let's see if we've got another question. Patricia, would you like to ask your question next?
Thank you. Thanks for the talk. I'm curious about your opinion about the role of blockchain technology in the next 10 years, and what area you see being disrupted the most in the next decade.
Yeah, I got involved in a couple of these projects for IBM, and I do think it fundamentally could change the value chains in a lot of industries. It is slow taking off, but we're beginning to see it. So, for example, if you think about understanding the source of fruit sitting in a supermarket, and one of the projects that we did was, I think, actually at Walmart, where if a mango had gone bad to the extent where we needed to find out what farm it came from, in which country, what time it was picked. Usually the old processes took something like 7 to 8 weeks to understand that sort of data, and having implemented a blockchain solution, this was something that was instantly available because of the systems that you put in place. So if you think about it, if you think about blockchain as basically being, if you think about SAP type of environment within a business, but a blockchain basically allows an SAP type of data transparency across your full value chain, you find you can do loads of things around it. Another example, there's a set of businesses come together to create a consortium with shipping to find out, where particular types of kit is, where it came from, where it was, and that's data that sits across many systems, many companies, many countries that comes together. So I think there's lots of use cases, and I don't think it's not really available and accessible or used as much as it could be. But I do think its day will come, and I do think that when it comes, it will totally transform the opportunities and the value chains.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. I do think it's actually is a change of paradigm completely. So this is why I was curious about the time frame. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Okay, sorry about that. It doesn't happen very often. Okay, now we are the next question by Zainab. Atiyeh, would you like to read your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks for the great talk. And I was just wondering, so when considering the responsible innovation, how can ethics be successfully applied and implemented to make a positive difference in organizational innovation, let's say?
I mean, that's the key question of the day, really. I mean, there was another question from Debbie on inequalities. I think there is a real danger actually right now that we are not looking at the ethics around what the results is of what we're doing with technology, or the ethics of how we're doing it in a consistent way. The thing that gives me hope is a couple of things. One is that if you look, I talked about the focus on sustainability, on climate, on governance. That is now a boardroom discussion. And in that, purpose and ethics, regardless of whether it's technology oriented or not, is becoming increasingly important. So that is something that I think will be a factor. And then the other thing is, I think the organizations such as Apple and Facebook and Google and so on, are becoming very aware that if the trust between the consumer or the government and the citizen and them is broken, then their business will suffer. And I think, again, just the business rules come into apply, which is it will be in their self-interest. And we already started to see that, there's consortiums being built up around the ethics of using data, the ethics of AI, and all the big players are playing a part in that. But it's early days, so I can't say, Zainab, that it's done, but I think it is on people's radar. But I'm with you. I am also concerned. I think this is potentially a risk. Okay.
I totally agree. It's a big topic, and we don't. If we think about the large platform companies as well, we only realize what happens afterward. And I'm thinking about the new business models of platform companies like Spotify, and it's very interesting to think about how technology may lead to unwanted results. Okay, I have a question from Debbie Debbie Blackburn that I missed earlier. So how do we tackle inequalities using the disruption techniques you describe? An age-old problem we need to solve, but unless we do this collectively, we will continue to create an unequal society. So this links to what we have just been discussing.
Yeah, I don't know, actually, is the real answer to that. I mean, it's a tough question.
I was going to say, if you can solve that, then I'd be very, very grateful. Working in the public sector, that would be amazing.
No, I think, I mean, and actually Vivek, my co-author, actually wrote a book before this one called Our Happiness Has Been Hacked, because of some of this, you know, inequalities that have been designed in actually to some of the technologies that have been rolled out. And, you know, he's done some fascinating research on some of the techniques used in keeping people addicted to gaming machines, used on apps to keep people addicted to apps, which are, you know, not great. As I said, you know, to the answer to the last question, I think the boardroom agenda around ESG and the consumer now recognition, it's you know, we sort of been going blind for 10 years, and now we know that, hang on a minute, this is something here about people using my data to do all sorts of stuff. So I think that awareness is starting to play a part, but I think we're miles away, Debbie, from having any sort of response to this, miles away.
Absolutely, and just to kind of respond, I was hoping you'd solve it for us, but working in the public sector in public health, actually, we've seen this, the lockdowns, the pandemic have created absolute digital divides. You know, we know that, you know, at least 2,000 children where I work didn't have access to digital technology, to equipment, to the Wi-Fi, to the, so actually this pandemic has created even more inequality in the system. And how do we use businesses and disruption techniques to create that social value responsibility for organizations to really invest and support those who are the most removed from you know, education and academic attainment, but actually have got some of the most creative minds, you know, that will be entrepreneurial and that will really kind of would create you know, the type of innovation that you're talking about. So thank you for a really fantastic talk.
Yeah, no, what we will do is, I think that's a fascinating discussion, and something that we do a lot of work with the Cabinet Office, something that I think they will be very interested in. We will try and set up a workshop discussion for anybody who's interested to come and have a think about how do we go around doing. I think that'll be worthwhile.
That's a very good idea, because I can see that this discussion is only just starting to scratch the surface of the problem. Yeah. So it will deserve a good separate event.
I agree.
Looking at the time, I would like to close the Q&A and pass it on to Professor Fiona Devine.
Thank you. Right. So Ismail, that was an absolutely brilliant talk. I feel I might have to go and lie down and soak it all up. But I suppose from my perspective, leading the business school, I know that a lot of my time is thinking of how to make the best of all the great ideas people bring forward, but how to facilitate the conditions and then how things happen. Yeah. Like you say, bringing resource to the table if you really mean it, and really thinking about issues about staff development. How do you get people to be able to get there and open up the space and the time for them to get there? Yeah. Because often the day job is getting in the way of innovation as well. So there's huge things to think about there. And just all the questions have come through. It's been fantastic. And I know Silvia talked to you yesterday, but I know she'll want to continue the conversation. So, yeah. So thank you very much, both of you. And thank you to all of you, the audience. I'm sure Ismail and Silvia have really been appreciated the questions that have come forward, really been very engaging conversation. Do please join us for other events. We do have lots of forthcoming events. We share that all on our website, so please look at that. And I think information has gone up as well on our next Vital Topic seminar in the chat room. So this has been one of our innovations this year, Ismail, and it's opened us up to much wider audience, and it's really been great to see so many people attend. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you again, Ismail and Silvia.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Right. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Just stopping the recording.